So can I get a quick straw poll first? How many people here actually use Node.js and actually use it every day in the work? So, yeah, not too many people. Okay. I'm going to screencast this as well. So let's start. So, as you can see, living on the edge of the infinite stack of turtles, with natural log all the way down. So, when we're doing things with JavaScript, we tend to do a lot of things with callbacks. So that's kind of the nature of the talk here. So first of all, just kind of who I am. I'm Tane Piper. You can follow me on Twitter, and you can go to my GitHub and see some of the source code that I've put up there. My day job, I'm a front-end developer at Free Agent. Tend to do quite a lot of website stuff. Not really what I'm talking about. This is more stuff I do in my own time. I do quite a lot of freelancing and a lot of consultancy around Node.js. So I'm going to be talking about a few things: Node.js, dnode, and things around WebSockets. And we've had WebSockets talks already, so I don't need to cover too much about that. But one little caveat is both these things have had new releases this week. Node.js 0.8 just came out yesterday, and dnode 1.0 came out last Thursday with API breaking changes. So I had to quickly rewrite some of the stuff that I'm going to be showing you today. So what is dnode? This is the crux of what I'm going to be talking about. Well, dnode is a library for Node.js. It's for writing applications where you do remote procedure calls. If you don't know what remote procedure call is, we'll go into that, but some of you may have worked with this before. And this is kind of the general, what people have been using up till now. This is SOAP. The remote procedure call is essentially, you have a server and it has a bunch of methods that are available to a user. And you have a client that wants to call these methods. So you need a way to get the data from the client to the server, make a request, call the specific method, and it will come back up. And up until now, a lot of people have tended to use things like SOAP, which you can use RESTful, you tend to over the network, but you have to kind of wrap things in XML when it comes to SOAP. So dnode is also a protocol for specifying remote procedure call servers. It uses JSON, which is new line terminated, and it allows your endpoints to communicate over the network. Just to quickly show you, I really recommend you go to the GitHub page and have a look at these things. There's dnode itself, and there is the dnode protocol. It's a little bit out of the scope of this, but you can go and read about the protocol itself. Essentially, it allows clients and servers, whether it be in the browser or over the network, to communicate with each other, handshake across the network and say, I've got these methods on this side and I've got these methods on that side, and it lets each side know what's there. And as of dnode 1.0, which came out on Thursday, that was written in streams. So I've decided to take a little bit of a sideway here and actually show you what streams are, because if you're using Node.js, I think this is one of the most important things that's coming out of the work that's being done there. So if you've got your laptop open, hopefully this is still the same IP for me. Yeah. So if you open your web browser to that address there, actually I've just realised it's not running, hold on. So it's just a blank web page. If you look in there, you'll see there's an image tag in there. What's that? That's not right. It's great when technology demos don't work. HTML. So this is using the Canary Chrome, and you should now be able to see on the screen. This is just an image. You can actually see here that as this is progressing, there's just this base64 encoded string getting streamed to the server. So streams don't just work in Node.js, they actually work in the browser as well. This is more of a kind of practical demo just to show you this working. We'll get some code going. So if you write JavaScript, this kind of way is going to be familiar to you, whether you're doing client or server-side JavaScript. When you want to read a file in Node.js, this is the way it tends to be in the documentation. You would read a file into by passing the file request in, and then you're going to kind of do a callback function. And what you're doing is even though it is asynchronous, you're now waiting for this data to load in. And as Ryan's talk covered, there's the heap in Node.js. V8 has a pretty hard limit of 2 gigabytes, which means that for an ISO like this is about 700 megabytes in size. And I want to load this all into memory. Now imagine 4 or 5 people want to do this at the same time. So if I run this little script here, it's now loading an ISO into memory. And it's taken ages, and you know, we're sitting here having to wait for this to be done. So it loaded in 701 megabytes, and in terms of the process it used, that process ballooned up to about 310 megabytes. So this is the way that you would tend to do this, and this is the way that it's documented in Node.js. But Node.js has these things called streams, which this has been around since about Node 0.4. It isn't really very well documented. It's the brainchild of kind of Michael Rogers and Isaac Schuster who work on Node. And what it allows you to do is work with streams of data rather than chunks of data. So what we'll do here is we'll create a stream where we're going to read this file in, and we're going to output to the output. And what we'll do is all streams are event emitters as well, so we can actually listen to events to see what's happening on here. So at the bottom here, we're going to take this stream, and we're going to pipe it to an outstream. So now we're actually only grabbing chunks of data, and we're outputting this quite quickly. But the process memory isn't ballooning like the last one up to 300 megabytes. At most, we've used about 60 megabytes for that whole process. And that was relatively quick. We could actually see what was happening with this as well, because we could listen to the event. Whereas when you do a callback, you don't know what's happening in your system. So you're having to wait for this. So even though it is an asynchronous request in the terms that it's non-blocking, there's a certain synchronicity to it because you can't find out what your system's doing. So why am I covering streams? Well, as I say, dnode has been rewritten on streams, and this is quite an important thing, I think. When I was writing the talk before, I did it a certain way, and then when the new way came out, I realized that this is really kind of core concept that we have to cover with this, because streams are actually awesome. So what is dnode? So say dnode is a way for you to create remote procedure call servers. The library itself, it takes a constructor for what you want to pass in, what you want to be able to allow your applications to do. And using WebSockets, for example, not in this specific example, I'll show WebSocket example shortly. This is just using a network server to create a socket point that you can connect to. So what we would do is we instantiate a dnode instance, and I'm just going to give it a method here called getMemory, where we're just going to do a request and find what the memory is. And typically we're going to pass it a callback function so we can get this data out as an asynchronous thing. We're going to pipe that dnode through the connection, which is going to listen on port 5001. And we're going to pipe that connection back out to dnode because we actually want to be able to have two-way communication between the parts of the application. dnode itself is also evented, so we actually have two events that you can listen to. The one I'm going to show you here is this on local event. And what that does is, this is before the constructor is packaged up in the protocol and sent to the other side of the server. What you can do is you can modify your local copy. So we're actually going to add another function onto this because it's a reference object, and we're going to add this ls function on. And it's just going to read the directory that we're passing, which is the directory up here, and it's going to return that as a callback. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fire this server up first. So what can we do with this? Well, we can connect a client to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to connect to that port in 5001. And then on the other side, we're going to create a dnode object. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a dnode object and we're going to pipe it through the client this time. And again, the client's then going to pipe that back to dnode so we can have a two-way communication. And what we're going to do now is we're going to listen for a remote event, because now we've got this object that's been created on the server side. It's been sent across the network to the dnode on the client side, and that has been reconstituted. So now on the client side, it knows that it's got this bunch of functions and they're attached to this remote object. So what we're now going to do is we're going to call the remote ls function, and that's going to return us a set of directories. And then what we're also going to do is we're just going to do a quick set interval. So every 5 seconds, we can request the memory from the remote side. So we'll now run the client. So we've got that. And now we're requesting the server memory. But hopefully you've noticed there's no AJAX here, there's no WebSockets. We're just passing functions around, and we're just passing them with parameters and callbacks. What dnode allows you to do is it just allows you to write JavaScript as you expect. And you don't have to worry about how you're transporting the data across. You just have to worry about that you've got 2 points of connection, a client, a server. With this server, you can have multiple clients connecting to it. You can have multiple connections over the network. Basically, the def in dnode is distributed. It allows you to distribute your services across a network or across a system. For example, you can imagine something like this where you have a server that has a file watcher and it listens to directory. And then when a file's dropped in there, it then says to all these clients that are connected to it, well, I've got this new file. Do you want to grab this file and pull it over the network? Well, you've just built Dropbox, and you can probably do that in about 60 lines of code. But the thing is, this is typically what we're doing here is the client mentality. We're actually saying, I'm a client and I want to request this information from the network. Well, dnode allows us to actually push information over the network and just call functions on the other side to give data. So if I kill the server, so what we'll do is on the server side, we'll actually have an on-memory function. And we're actually going to, oh, that's the wrong one. On the client side here, we're going to have attach a local, and we're going to have an on-memory function, which just is a function that takes this information in and will output it. And on the server side, we're going to call that function on the client side. So if I start the server up again, so we're doing the same ls there, that's fine. But now we're getting the server memory, but we're actually pushing this from the server to the client. And all we're doing again is we're just calling a function and giving it a parameter that gives that information. But other than that, what else can we do with this? Well, actually, we can have a two-way conversation between the client and the server. Oops. So now what we should see is actually both outputs. So now the server and the client are actually talking to each other, and all they're doing is that they're calling these functions on either side, and they're saying, here, have my memory, and we're just outputting it. But of course, this is all on the server side. This isn't very interesting in terms of what you're seeing in the output. What you really want to be doing with this stuff is you want to actually be interacting with your users. So you want to be able to do this in a way that you can interact with a browser. So as we've shown already with the video demo, streams work in the client side as well. We can actually work these in the browser. So I've been working on a little application here. And this application is now on GitHub. You can go to GitHub and grab that from here. It is a little bit messy because I've had to rework some of the code recently, so I do apologise for it not being very well documented. But feel free to go and grab this. Just leave this up for a second while you get the address. Well, apparently it's already running. So this is a little Twitter application that I wrote. And just to show you how quickly it runs, I'm just going to load up Twitter's official app. And hopefully some of you should start tweeting. So as you can see, at the same time that the Twitter application is working in terms of a native application, it's connecting over the network. I've got an application in the browser that's doing this exactly the same. If I tweeting it. That's showing up straight away. And what's happening with this is in this application here. I'm basically creating a simple Express application that uses a Redis store to store the session. So when the user logs in, it does the kind of OAuth dance, creates a session, and then stores that. And any time the user now comes back, as long as that session is active, what will then happen is it will create this socket instance. And what we'll do is, I'm using a library here. Instead of using ScotlandJS, Socket.io, or anything like Pusher, I'm using a much lighter WebSocket implementation that's called Shoe. And this one is natively built around streams as well. So it allows the data to be streamed across the network. Once we've created that, it creates the local connection. And all I'm doing is I have an auth function here that kind of does a little bit of a dance for me. But once that's done, I create an instance of an application. And in that, I attach some functions, which call this Twitter library. So this does all the request for me. And then what I do at the end of here is I call back here. I just pass this application through. So what I can do now is on the client side, I've now got this app with all these functions that are available to me. So if I want to do something like, I want to do a Twitter search, let's search for ScotlandJS. That will now go and that will now go send a packet across the socket stream, go away and do a request, and it's not coming back with anything. I probably shouldn't have done such a live demo. Search, query, callback. Go away and do a query and come back with a callback. Let's see if it's working here. Okay, the search is not working for some reason. Okay, let's do update status. Oh, you're right. Oh. Oh, I don't know, I just love when things don't work. What is going on with this? Well, hopefully you can see what I'm trying to do with this. It's basically, I'm writing an application where I'm not having to go away and do, take an object and collapse it into a JSON string and then pass that over Ajax. I'm actually just calling functions that are on the client side, and they're calling functions on the server side. It just means that I can write JavaScript in the client side and in the server side and have them talk to each other in a natural way that you would expect for a JavaScript developer. So I think on that point, with nothing working, I will take any questions. If anyone has any. Yep.
So it seems really similar to frameworks like Firebase or Meteor or Adobe, except you are actually calling functions on the server, so you have a lot more control over security and functionality. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, you can essentially.
Can you repeat the question, please?
All right, sorry. So the question was, there's other frameworks out there like Now.js, Meteor. They're doing very similar things, allowing you to do remote procedure calls over the network. But the way that Dino does it is it wraps it in a way that you can just call functions. So you could have a lot of control over security. That is true. I mean, for example, your results that come back, they're part of the return callback. So they're in a closure. So it's quite difficult for somebody to get in and kind of get to these in terms of exposed data. So, for example, you could pass about tokens and auth, potentially passwords in there as well. And as long as you keep them within that local scope, then hopefully they shouldn't leak out into the global scope of the application. So,
but ultimately, still execute the code on the server.
Oh, you're still executing the code on the server, absolutely. That's the thing. Although those functions are there, if you actually look at a function, so if I just console.dir this, that's what you're getting back. You're not seeing the function. You just see Dino's implementation of this is a function that can be called, and it takes, it splices these arguments and it sends them across the protocol. So people are not getting exposed to your functions. You can have very if you're writing an application that say, does some security stuff. People are not going to see your code by having these exposed functions. All they're going to see is that these functions are available. Because one of the things is dnode, even though I'm showing you the Node.js implementation, it's actually available for Perl, Ruby, and Java as well, and there is a PHP implementation, actually. So you could actually add dnode as an endpoint. So you don't just have a RESTful API, you could actually have a remote procedure call, a set of functions that people can connect to using these services, and they can consume your data. So that is quite possible.
I've got another question. Do you have an example of, like, you know, you mentioned SOAP, and WSDL is like the thing that lists the methods. Do you have an example of what that looks like?
Actually, yeah. So there's the WSDL, which is the SOAP implementation. What that is when you want to do something with SOAP, you have to, first of all, get this file, this WSDL file, and take a request from that. And what that does, that comes back with a list of functions that are available to you to use. You then can take that, the output from that, and use that to generate your remote procedure calls. You can, with dnode here, I mean, with the WebSocket view in Canary, you can actually see there, this is the JSON that's getting passed about. So it's passing this thing that's saying that, you know, it's method 1 that's being called, it has a set of arguments, and then you can see there that's the JSON that's getting passed around. It's just a bunch of strings there. That's the implementation there for the... there we go. There's the first one. So yeah, so when everything comes back, you actually do get this JSON that you could potentially query. But that's the point of dnode, is you don't have to think about that, because when you connect the two dnode points, dnode goes, oh, I've got this remote object now. Now here's the functions. What I'm doing is I'm attaching that to a global app that I'm doing. So it's now available to me in the console there. So that's where I can start typing things into the console and get that. You could potentially put that somewhere else and keep that quite secure. And as long as your app exists in a closure, then you know that stuff could be relatively secure from the user. But yeah, absolutely, you've got that there. I'd say the protocol is a little bit outside of the kind of scope of this, going too much. But basically, it converts your application into a list of things like this. So it transports that over the network and lets the other side know what's there. The last version of dnode did. I haven't tested this new one because the old one was pretty tightly bound to Socket.io. So it had Socket.io had fallback to XHR, JSON-P, long polling, and Flash. So you got that functionality. I think with this, because I'm using the shoe library, that's pretty much just WebSockets. But what you're losing in terms of older browser support, you're gaining in terms of being able to stream vast amounts of data across the network. I mean, as you've seen with the first demo that I showed you, that was taking video capture and as an image, as a PNG, converting that to base 64, streaming it down to the client, so the server, and then streaming it out to all the clients. So you've got, you can be working with quite a large amount of data in that sense, and I think if your app's you're not going to get that webcam functionality in IE7 because it's only in Chrome Canary at the moment, and it's only going to probably be in Firefox and Chrome for the foreseeable future. So for that type of app, you might want to do that. If you want to support an older app, you're probably going to use Socket.io as your transport instead of that one. The transports for dnode are pretty interchangeable. I mean, you can take that and you can put Socket.io in, no problem. The question was, you can pass function argument. Yep, you can. As you can see here, these arguments, that's a named function there. But if you had a callback function that you passed an object, you could attach functions to that object, pass that back up to the client, and then have those functions be called, and it'll call those on the server again. Yeah, it's absolutely possible. That's actually what I'm doing here. Is so when I call this auth function here, and I pass in a token and a callback, what I'm actually doing is I'm generating an object here called app that has all these functions. They're just attached to this variable called app, and then that's all I'm passing back up in the callback at the end. So yeah, so I'm just generating functions on the fly and sending them up. And, you know, they're not connected to dnode. They exist in their own object, but they now exist within this closure here that I've created within auth. And yeah, that means that you can, you know, within that, this here, you know, this function could have a bunch of functions inside it as well. And then I could pass this up, and that's going to have, you know, show users now going to have this.foo as another function that you can call. So the way it changes it is it basically will take every part of your object, convert it out into a string, and assign functions with IDs so that the two sides know how to communicate with each other.
Could you then pass it away? So if I'm on the client and I'm searching,
Mm-hmm.
I can call an API call passing an arbitrary function that I write that sends that back to the server, which will then execute it.
Well, yeah, because the server will then call the client back. Yep. And then what that does is that converts that to an ID. The server will call that function.
Yeah, but you couldn't create an inline function. It wouldn't serialize that and pass that up.
Yes, it will.
So even if the server has no knowledge of that function,
Yep.
is that not very dangerous? That you could then just pass
It could potentially be.
then gets executed?
It could potentially be dangerous, but you're not. But you're executing the code on the client side, not on the server side. So you can only do what's in the client.
Right, so you couldn't pass anything to search that then searches on, so it's presumably it's searching Twitter on the server.
Oh yeah, I mean, like the search function, it can only do what's in this search function here. If you pass a function as query, well, it's just going to pass. It's just going to pass that as a string to
So it won't
this.
serialize it?
No, it won't. No. I mean, well, let's see if we can actually get this to work this time. So you mean something like that? Ah, crashed. Yeah, so it crashed map, but yeah, it's probably coming back. There's probably do you know that'd be there's probably no results in there. It maybe has done something there, but yeah, that's not something that I've necessarily thought about. So yeah, I'll maybe investigate that. But that looks like that was working there now. So hopefully I can show you this now. There we go. Yay, it worked this time. So as you can see, I'm just getting back an object, an array of objects that, you know, I'm doing some processing on the server side. I'm taking the object that I get from Twitter, I'm rendering it, you know, as a template that I'm then just sending back as this object that's got the data, the ID, the template, and then I'm just using my client side to, you know, inject that straight into the DOM. Any other questions? Okay, thanks.